Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Paper Trail podcast. I'm your host, Megan. At the Paper Trail, we are hoping to document the stories and testimonies of our fellow brethren. Through this effort, we hope that every individual that takes the time to listen or watch is uplifted. Today, we have a special guest with us, AJ DeLaO. She will be sharing her testimony and how God has moved in her life. So, AJ, I was wondering if your younger self could see you now, what would she be surprised about?
I would say probably that I'm actually serving God and living for Him.
Is there a particular moment that you consider a turning point in your life, whether it be positive or negative?
I'd say there's probably like 2 to 3 major ones. The first one would probably be like because like you already know this, but like I grew up Baptist, and then we came to Pentecost when I was around 7 years old, and we started attending a church. And I really loved this church, honestly. From the memories I do have, which are very sparse now, um, I can only say positive things. I really did enjoy my time there. I really did love the people. It just, after about 3 years of congregating with them, my parents started to notice things that, they weren't really agreeing with, things that weren't really in alignment with God. So we decided, well, more so my parents, to have a change. And I would say that's the first major turning point in my life because you kind of think about it like, oh, you're just leaving a church. You'll still see them at camp meeting. You'll still see them at camp. Still see them at, we didn't have hyphen conference back then, I don't think. And even then, I was also only 11 years old when this happened. But, you're kind of like, you'll still see them. But what ended up happening was a lot different from what an outlook would have been. You know, you would have assumed that. But instead of, letting us leave peacefully, they instead excommunicated and shunned us, believing that we were in the wrong. And, being 11 years old, you don't really understand that. You don't really understand why an adult would do that to you, you know? And then, so much of that it happened when I was 11, but for the longest time, I honestly thought it happened when I was 12. And that was because I had blocked out so many memories from that time. So if you ask me anything about my fifth grade year, I could tell you things probably about school, but anything other than school, I honestly, I can't remember. And it kind of sucks because I can remember, like, every year before then, but up to like my fifth grade year, I just can't remember. And I don't think I really understood how much it hurt me because I think I wanted to believe that they still loved me. I wanted to believe that it was all just a big misunderstanding, and that was my reality for a long time, where I was kind of just running from the truth. Um, and then as time went on, I think I was like 13 years old. Well, I was more so like 12 years old when I really started to deal with depression, um, suicidal thoughts, anxiety, self harm, all of the 9 yards. I would, if I went out in public when I was 13, I would have a panic attack. And it was habitual. It was almost every day. If I went out in public, I would have a panic attack. And my mom would literally pour cold water down my back to calm me down because it would be the only thing that could calm me down because I just was so anxious and it just robbed me completely of my peace. And I, like, for example, like, depression, it looks different for every person. And for me, it started off as I just couldn't stop thinking. Like, I was just thinking 24/7 and it just wouldn't stop. And then one day it just came to the point where I wasn't thinking at all. I got to the point where I was feeling everything, and then one day I just wasn't feeling anything at all. I just became so numb, and it felt like the start was so far from where I was, and it felt like going back was too difficult. And so then when I was 13, I came to the consensus, the realization that, the best course of action would be just to end my life. And, I had attempted suicide, and I remember being in the pool that I was going to drown myself in, and I just couldn't do it. I don't know what it was. I mean, now I do, but back then I didn't know what it was, but I just couldn't do it. And my parents tried getting me into therapy and all this stuff, and I just tried running from it because I didn't want people to know I wasn't okay, and I also didn't want to admit that I wasn't okay. And at the same time, I also didn't even realize what the source of this all was. I just thought that it was just something that happened, just something that happens in your life. That's what I thought it was. But as time went on, I like started to realize, especially like around the time that I was 18, that's when I really realized that it was because of the things that happened to me when I was 11, of being shunned. I remember, we were at camp meeting and we saw some of the people from my old church, and they just kind of went the other way. They saw us, didn't acknowledge us. I tried being cordial, I tried being nice, as nice as an 11-year-old can be, and they just completely ignored my mom and and I remember being with my cousins going to camp, and we just happened to be in the same restaurant as some of them, and they were going to their own camp because this church ended up falling out of alignment with the will of God completely. They dissolved, and they merged with another church, and this church is not affiliated with Pentecost or anything like that. um and a lot of them have backslidden since that time. um and I remember seeing them at this restaurant, and I wanted so badly for them to talk to me, and they didn't. And even at that time, that was around the time I was 13 as well. But around this whole entire time, I just kept thinking, one day they're gonna apologize to me. One day they are going to look back and understand that I wasn't in the wrong, my family wasn't in the wrong, and they're gonna all just apologize to me. And up from when I was like 11 to 18, I was waiting for that. I was like, we're all going to get back together. We're going to get the church started again. God's going to move. There's going to be revival. And I didn't realize how much of a toll that belief was taking on me because, you know, I wanted to believe that it was going to happen. But at the same time, the more I believed that that was going to happen, the more it took me from God. The more it like started to make me have doubt because I started to believe, if this stuff could happen to me, clearly God doesn't love me. And I started to believe, why it hasn't happened yet? Why haven't they apologized yet? And because of that, it just completely, I didn't realize it, but it severed my relationship with God. And it took me a while to get back to that, I won't lie. And I would say from the time that I was 11 to the time that I was about 16, I was backslidden. I would say that 1000%. I was actually talking to Aiden the other day, and we were talking, or my mom and too, and we were all talking about like, some things, something that I had done when I was 15. And apparently my mom got really mad at me, and it was just like all these different things. And then we were talking about it, and my mom's like, or Aiden's like, what did you even say? What did you even do? And I was like, if I was 15 when this happened, I would have been on the cusp of cursing. And I know some people, you know, that's different. It's different in their story, but for me, cursing is something I never wanted to do. I never believed in it. I can probably list on my hand the amount of times I've cursed, but I would have been on the cusp of being so far from God to where I would have thought that that was okay. And so it took me a long time to get back from that. So that would be like the first turning point in my life, is just being separated from the people that you thought were your family. And then the second, I would say, it's kind of like the antithesis, if I'm saying that right. But no, I was 16 years old, and I was kind of like done with everything. I was like, I don't want to live for God. I don't want to live. Like, and it was all these different things because this stuff never went away from me. Um, and so I remember thinking, I'm gonna just give it one more shot. And I had a chance to go to Washington D.C. for some science trip. At this point, I can't remember what it was, or even if it was even impressive. Sounds impressive, I don't even know. But I had a chance to go to that. But then I was talking to my mom, and she was like, "Well, you can do that, or you can go on a mission trip." And I was like, "Well, I've never been on one of those before, and I always thought that they looked cool. So why don't I try?" So I went on an AYC trip. It was my first trip, and I went to Alaska, and I kind of felt out of place. I never lifted up my hands in worship. I never really spoke in tongues that much. I could speak in tongues, I just never did. I never prayed, never read my word. We get there. One of the first questions they ask me, they're like, "What are you called to do? Like, what do you feel called?" And I was like, "I don't really know. I want to become a doctor." At that time, I wanted to be a doctor. Um, But that was about it. I didn't really have any other goals or plans in my life. I just wanted to make money. And so I remember just feeling so out of place. But my friends on that trip, they helped me not feel that way. And then I remember it was the last prayer that we had. It was right after our testimonials. And we decided to do a prayer together. And I just remember thinking during that prayer, I was like, there's no point in praying for God to heal me. I just remember thinking that. I was like, there's no point in ever believing that anything will ever get better. And I just remember there was like a voice in the back of my head that thought, but what if? Like, what if this prayer, this moment could change everything for me? And, that's technically like my Kairos moment, I guess you would say, a divinely appointed time where it was in that moment that I finally was like, you know what, God, I don't know what your will is for me. I don't know what your plan is, and I don't know where I'm going. But all I know is that I have drifted far from you for too long. And I just remember praying, and I was like, I didn't have the right words. Like I said, I didn't know how to pray, And so, in the most sloppy way possible, I repented and I asked God to just come back into my life. And that was the best decision I have ever made in my entire life. And if I could go back, I would do it again a million times over because it was in that moment that I finally understood I couldn't depend on myself and I had to depend on him. And I can't say that from that time afterwards that it was all just, um, rainbows and butterflies and all that stuff. It was not. Like I still struggled with a lot of stuff. I still struggled with depression for so long. Um, but it was just a moment in which something just truly changed in me to where I finally was like on the right path. And the thing about depression, especially, is like people oftentimes, I think they have a misconception that, like, and I'm not saying that this isn't true. People just believe that if you just pray for someone, that they'll be healed of depression like that. And I'm not doubting that that's happening. That can happen. I don't doubt that can happen. The gift of working miracles, it is real. The gift of healing, it is real. All of it is real. But the thing is that when it comes to depression, that's a mindset thing. That's a mind thing. It's purely psychological, and it can be caused by things outside of your own control, which was the issue for me. Um, People who have dealt with what I dealt with specifically have symptoms of what's known as complex PTSD. And I'm not saying I have that, but I do have symptoms of that to where, a lot of the things I struggled with, it's in alignment with that. So the thing with depression, one of my professors said, and I'm not going to say which professor because I don't want to quote him wrong. One of my professors, he was saying, sometimes someone with depression, what they have to do is they have to decide, to try to get better. And every day it's another challenge where it's like, okay, today may be a good day, but tomorrow might be a bad day. But you will start to work up a like a resistance to it, kind of like a when you work out, and you get stronger. It's kind of like that. So it's like, maybe you'll have one good day and then one bad day. And then the next day will be a good day. And then the next day will be a bad day. But then you'll have two more good days. And then you'll have a bad day. But then you'll have another four good days. And it'll just become a process until you finally, are able to get to a point where you are no longer triggered by the same things that would trigger you in the past. You can finally have a more positive outlook on life. You can finally, like, something bad can happen and you're not thinking about, like, throwing yourself off a building or something like that. And that's just kind of like what I believe that that's what's important for people to understand regarding depression, is that it is not a easy fix. And just because someone struggles with it doesn't mean that they are too far gone. And it also does not mean that they can just be fixed overnight. It just means that it needs patience, it needs love. Um, and I would say if anyone's struggling with that, to definitely reach out for help. Eventually, I did go to therapy, and that did, you know, I had a therapist who was faith aligned, and she really helped me get on the right track. She really helped me work through a lot of my issues. So I would definitely say, like, if you struggle with depression, kind of like search for a faith based one. And I do believe that God has established therapists who are faith based, kind of like that's their calling. And He can use them to help you.
going with that, have there been times in which you have felt discouraged and or tempted to quote unquote give up?
Oh yeah, plenty of times, Um it kind of just like it's the process of sanctification, where you kind of like are going through it. There's a lot of times where, I'd be like thinking, man, I really wanted to be this. I really wanted to do that. And now I'm on this path and it's not in alignment with that anymore. And it would cause doubt. But then anytime that would happen, I would always look back, on where I've been. And I would always look back on the things that I'd seen God do. And I would just think, there's just no other life. There is no other, there is no plan B. This is it. Because if the God who did all of this throughout my life, if he could truly do all of that, then I know that he has me in the palm of his hands. I know without a shadow of a doubt that no matter what situation I go through, he can help me. And it took me a while to get that kind of faith. Nowadays, you could probably attest to this. I kind of sometimes, I'm not reckless, but there are times where I'm like, it's okay. I'm not worried. I'm not stressed. God's got it. And if his will is for this to fall through, then that's his will. Applying for like masters, for example, I'm only going to apply for one master's program. If it doesn't work out, then, that wasn't the will of God. I applied to one college, and if it wasn't the will of God, I was just like, okay, I guess I'm not going to college. Of course, it's stressful, but at the end of the day, I trust him. I trust his will. I trust his plan. And, I would say my faith is as the strongest it's ever been in my life. And I just will continue to depend on him. And so no matter how many doubts I've had, every time it comes up, my first thought is always like, no, God has already proved to me his love. He's already proved to me what he can do. So I'm not going to give up. I'm going to continue to push through.
What is something you would say to your teenage self, even though you haven't been a teenager for not that long?
She's saying that because I'm 21. It's okay. You can call me Unc.
You just got out of your teens 2 years ago.
Yeah, 3. Wait, no, 2. Wait.
That's why I was like,
Wait, okay, I'm bad at math. Ignore that. Oh wait, that's crazy. Um, so what I
maybe
would
not teenage, maybe like younger self then.
preteen.
Yeah, that's better.
I would say, kind of just be patient with yourself. Be patient with those around you for sure. I would be angry. I was angry a lot. Another emotion I struggled with a lot was anger. Anger at God, anger at my family, anger at myself. I blame myself for everything that happened for so long. Um, I was upset because, after we went to that church, we ended up going to an apostolic assembly church, and I love that church, and I only have positive things to say about that church. But, at some point, one of my siblings, I won't say who, Aiden, he he just kind of like wasn't feeling it. He wanted something different. And so then that kind of caused my parents to find some other people who had left our previous church, you know, and then they started our current church together, Desert Stream Fellowship. And for the longest time, I was so angry because they had taken me from the first church I was at. They took me from that, and then they put me into an AA church, and I loved that church. Loved it so much. I had so many friends there, and then they took me from that, and they put me in a church where at the time it was just Aiden and I. Like, you can imagine the anger I had. And for the longest time, I would actually say that I hated our church. For the longest time, I would literally I would go to the bathroom during altar call. As soon as church was over, I would go outside. I did not want to be here. It took a while for God to work on my heart, and it was just all that anger I had in me. And so, if I could go back, I would definitely say, just be patient with yourself, be kind. Um, I know it's kind of like a cliche, but it's true because now I look back and, I work in an elementary school and, I see my students. I love them dearly. I do. I love my students so much. And my fifth graders in specific, whenever I would see them, make a mistake, do something wrong, And in my head, I would think, like, bro, why'd you do that? But then I would also remember, they're only 10, they're only 11, they're only 12, however old they are. Um, they're still babies, they're still kids. And I would look at them and I would just think, that I was that age when everything happened. Or my sixth graders, I would also think that about them, where I'm like, I was that age when that happened. And it would cause that, because it's only been a year that I've been working in the schools. Um, but that has really put into perspective, how much I let that take a toll on me. And it really helped me understand, I just I have to be more patient with myself and to not allow that condemnation to win, you know? Because, I actually recently found a study that I kept in I put in one of my papers for college. So at least I remembered that. Studious. But it says currently around 29% of Americans have a negative view of religion, with about 44% of Americans believing that it does more harm than good. Then, according to another study in 2010, around 37% of Americans that do not attend church explained that their reason for doing so stems from negative past experiences with the church and or its people. And then one more study says that researchers found that 27 to 33% of Americans experienced religious trauma in their life, with around 20% experiencing symptoms relating to their trauma. And, the paper I wrote was on love. It was specifically, if I read my thesis, I could possibly find it right now, but it was specifically about, loving the church and how whether or not we show love as the church body, how that affects our witness and our testimony. And I wrote this paper specifically because I knew only my professor was going to read it, but I wanted it to be that my younger self, who had so much anger, who had so much hurt, would finally understand, you know, it was like I wanted it to be that everything was put into words. And of course, I never really brought up my feelings. I never brought up my anything in this. It was just a paper. But it was through that I was finally able to understand, this isn't just me who's experienced this. This isn't just me who has gone through this. My parents experienced it too, and obviously, and then Aiden experienced it too. Ethan wasn't in the church yet when that happened, but there are others who have experienced something similar. And in tandem with me speaking to my younger self, I would also speak to those who are experiencing this now. Because, I know sometimes church hurt can be put in a negative light. And I know sometimes people have certain emotions regarding it. And everyone is up to their own opinion. Everyone is, that is your say. But to those who are experiencing church hurt, who are experiencing a hurt related to something that somebody in the church did to you, what I would say, don't let that deter you from God. Don't let that be the reason why you run from Him. Because if you do, it's taking you from something so beautiful. My relationship with God, obviously when I was younger, was very tumultuous. But now it's something that I just depend on. Now it's like it's just it's knowing that somebody's there for you no matter what. And if you're experiencing a kind of hurt from church hurt and it's taking you from a body of Christ, I don't know what it is for you, because for me obviously it was being shunned wrongfully. I know some people it can be from correction, others it can be rumors and gossiping. And recently, actually not that recent, but I watched a movie. It's called Miracles from Heaven. It's a really good movie. But in the movie, this little girl has a terminal illness, right? And everyone in the church starts gossiping about her family, saying that like clearly they did some kind of sin to deserve her daughter to be having this kind of illness. And the mom, I remember, she just decided not to go to the church. She decided, I'm not going to congregate with them. I'm not going to be associated with people who could be so cruel and evil to me. and she's having a conversation with the pastor, and the pastor explains, he's like, from his experience, he's experienced hurt and all of these different things, a whole laundry list of issues. And he's experienced them and dealt with it in two ways. He's dealt with it by running away from God and running to God. And in his experience, he says that the latter is much better than the former. By running to God, much more of your issues will be solved. And I'm not saying everything will be fixed, but I'm saying that you can rest in him. You can be assured in him. And, Jesus himself, he was hurt by church people, technically, the Pharisees. That was his people, that was from his religion. And, they yelled, crucify me, or crucify him, sorry, not crucify me, crucify him. They did all of these different things. They tortured him. They did all of that. And he still loved them. He's the perfect example of how you can transform something like hurt into something like love. Because love is the most important thing. And, I would wager to say that with all these statistics and all these different people who are experiencing church hurt, it does stem from the church's lack of love. I would wager to say that 1000%. And that's, it depends on each person and what situation they're involved in. But ultimately, it's up to you to show the love of Christ back. It's up to you to still pursue him. So, yeah, that's what I would say. Sorry.
It's okay. So, you kind of touched on that. But is there anything else you'd like to add that you would say to someone who's experiencing similar trials to you?
Pretty much is what I said.
Yeah, I was like, you kind of already touched on that.
I didn't really review the questions, even though I wrote them.
So I was like, is there one final thing maybe you kind of you would say to someone?
Well, I'd say, for example, to anyone struggling with depression, be understand that this doesn't have to be the end. And I know sometimes it can feel difficult. It can feel, far. You can feel distant from others. It can feel like you're drowning and nobody sees you. It can feel like you're in the middle of the ocean and you're trying to traverse all of these waves. You're trying to swim to the surface, and meanwhile, everyone else is just swimming just fine. I know how that feels. I know it can be difficult. I know it can be hard to navigate. And I'm not saying that my situation is the same as everyone else's. But similar to what that pastor said, I've experienced it running from God and I've experienced it running to God. And in my experience, I will 1000% say that ever since I have run to God with my problems, things have just gotten so much easier. You know, I'm at a point in which I never thought I'd be 21. I never thought that I had plans in case, to me that was my plan B. I would always plan around all my issues, and be like, okay, well, if this doesn't work out, then at least, like, if I'm still alive, I still have something to fall back on. That would always be something that I had. But I never truly believed that I'd get to this point. And I would say, continue fighting, continue, searching after God and reaching for him, because he's the one who can bring you strength. He's the one who's able to bring you healing. He's the one who's able to show you love when it feels like no one else can. He's close to those who are brokenhearted, and I know that that's a cliche to hear, but I would definitely just say, just keep running to him and don't look back. Depression will keep you. It will make you look towards the past. It'll make you look towards the what ifs. It'll make you look towards what you want to have happened. But don't let it. Continue pushing forward. Continue pursuing God. Continue looking towards a future where there is brighter days, because those do exist. And I know that's another cliche. But cliches are a cliche for a reason, typically because they work. So.
Alrighty. So now we're gonna segue into maybe some more funnier questions. So my first question is, what's your favorite ice cream at Dairy Queen?
I I really like the drumstick blizzard.
Yeah, but that's only seasonal. That's just because you recently discovered that. But out of all the various ones that we have tried, give your top three. What if the viewers are looking for a new Dairy Queen order? Maybe you're going to introduce them to something that they've never tried.
Okay.
So, top three.
Well, technically, I've only ever tried 3. And one of well, okay, in the recent years. I'm sorry, but I'm not gonna include cotton candy. That was when I was a kid.
No, okay, so I'll give you the list we've tried.
Okay, I do remember the list. I remember the list. I would definitely say my number 1 is drumstick. My number 2 is angel food cake. And my number 3 is chocolate covered strawberry. But chocolate covered strawberry is specifically seasonal for Valentine's Day. So if you are trying to go and try it, I'm sorry to disappoint, but it most likely is not going to be there.
I think it's just chocolate shavings and strawberry.
Yeah, but like, don't you think that? You know what? It's okay. Um,
But you're right. Okay. So, for anyone who doesn't know, AJ is a gamer.
oh,
So, she's a hardcore gamer girl. And she
really
loves
not.
this game called Roblox. And it's just an app. It's not a game. It's an app with a bunch of games inside. And there's this one game in particular that AJ loves playing. What is that game, AJ?
Leave the facility.
Can you give a little brief explanation of what this game entails
I
and
didn't
why it's
realize
so
that
fun?
this was embarrassed AJ time.
It's not. It's funny questions.
Anyways, in Flee the Facility, you're basically 5 players all together, but one of them is the Beast. The Beast is trying to freeze all the players, and the players are trying to hack computers and escape the Beast.
Just a little side note. This isn't important, but I'm terrible at this game. Absolutely terrible. Like I get wrecked. Um, and we have many stories of her and I playing this game together. And while we have a lot of fun, there's also a lot of rage. Of course, we pray about it, but there's a lot of rage that can go on.
Okay, but
So
like,
just know, anyone who plays this game, have fast reflexes, have great awareness, and great hearing.
and follow AJ if she's telling you to follow her.
Yeah, but maybe start off by playing by yourself.
Well, I don't know about you, but after hearing her testimony, I feel encouraged. It is truly beautiful to see what God can do and how He can turn lives around. If you or someone you know is struggling with any topics mentioned or want to know more about Jesus, we encourage you to be a light and share the gospel with them. You never know who may be impacted by the power of your testimony. Thank you, AJ, for your willingness, and we thank our viewers for tuning in. Until next time, God bless.